Well, two of the world's biggest economies have held formal talks for the first time in 5 years.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met on the sidelines at the BRICS summit in Russia. It comes days after both struck a deal to resolve a 4-year military standoff along their disputed frontier. The rare show of harmony marks a win for summit host Vladimir Putin, who is using the event to demonstrate that BRICS can challenge the hegemony of the West.
The enlarged group has also adopted a joint communique that touts closer cooperation in the areas of trade and an alternate payment system.
For more insight on the apparent thaw in ties between China and India, let's speak now with Richard Rossow, the senior advisor and chair on India and emerging Asia economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, could you talk to us about the factors that you think that have prompted the two leaders to signal a willingness to thaw tensions, and given the historical mistrust, just how genuine is this shift?
From China's vantage point, you look around and they've got tensions with practically all their neighbors right now. So anytime that they spot an opportunity to reduce tensions and that maybe ease a little bit of pressure on their military and spending patterns, it's probably a good thing. So I suspect that's what's on China's mind. For India, it's a bit of a black mark. The fact that China was able to take over positions that India previously controlled, and India has relatively few tools to try to dislodge them. So seeing this get resolved as well as a political win, I think, for Prime Minister Modi. But it is only one of the many areas of tension between the two countries. You've got maritime issues, trade issues, religious, of course, with the future of Buddhism hanging in the balance. So this is a good step in the right direction among two neighbors, but it certainly doesn't unravel all the thorny issues they have between them.
Yeah, Richard, why now? What do you make of the timing of this disengagement process between the two countries? That it's happening at BRICS.
Yeah, I think they do want to prove that BRICS still has some relevance. There's been some issues in the past, of course, with India and China tensions as two of the four founding members of BRICS. When the two of them had tensions, you heard some voices in China talking about trying to expel India. So I suspect that as much as India wants to be able to, work within the systems that are created for international order, but also try to find a larger voice in maybe some of the systems that are being created, more recently. To challenge that world order. I think India wants to have its cake and eat it too, in terms of those functions. And having a summit like this where they can show that two big countries can come together and resolve their differences, it is probably one of the more successful things we say that has been accomplished at a BRICS forum. So it checks a box. But again, there's still a lot of areas that they have to unravel before we're going to say, the two are walking hand in hand towards peace.
Indeed. And Richard, we know the details are pretty scant, but I want to get your thoughts or your read into that agreement on military disengagement along their disputed border, which sort of includes patrolling arrangements between the two sides. But is it enough to ease the military standoff and sort of sustain long-term peace?
Probably not. It's not the first time that you've seen disengagement. The two countries have a long border, which is only loosely demarcated. They got areas where troops from both countries are allowed to patrol, but the idea was they could never camp out, they could never set up hardened facilities, and that's where China really kind of broke the rules there, which were the baseline for them to begin to negotiate, hopefully, a longer-term agreement on the border. So this is not the first time that you've had an agreement, not the first time that China's agreed to withdraw and pull back. Only time will tell if this will stick. In terms of military tensions, the land is probably the area because they've actually had combat. No shots fired, of course, but they've had combat that's been the most in the front of people's minds. But the maritime domain is probably the larger prize that China covets, to be able to conduct long-term operations and control its lines of trade, even during wartime throughout the Indian Ocean. And that's where I think navies are going to have increasing areas of contestation as we look ahead. And I don't suspect that any kind of agreement between the two is going to resolve the maritime issues that are likely to emerge even more strongly in the coming years.
Yeah, indeed. So, the broader dispute still remains unresolved. India and China, they have disputed their border for 70 years. So while this deal is a welcome move, where does it really stand in the grand scheme of things? And explain to us the complexities of this disputed frontier, why it is significant or valuable to both India and China.
some nominal value to China. Up at the border areas, the ability to potentially cut off trade and connectivity with the 7 Indian states that are almost entirely cut off from the mainland, with Bangladesh kind of thrusting up in the eastern part of the country. So there is some level of strategic advantage for these heights. Obviously, it's not an area where we're going to grow food, and there hasn't been any significant discovery of natural resources, but there is some military strategic advantage for being able to control high-level positions there. But my own hunch, and I think that's shared with a lot of other analysts, is it's probably a bit of a probing move by China to take India's eye off the ball from the maritime domain. And I think India fully kind of understands that, but you need to react. You need to react to it. So if this happens, you've got a clash at the border. The Indian Army suddenly is having a lot of its capital acquisition needs met to try to outfit a mountain core. What's that going to do for India's ability to project power in the maritime domain? So I think that from Beijing's interest, the land, the territory has some nominal strategic value, but the bigger is trying to take India's eye off the real prize, which is the maritime domain.
Richard, as you mentioned, it's still early on, but I wonder how might improved India-China relations affect the effectiveness of the BRICS as a counterweight to Western influence. And I wonder how Washington is viewing all this.
Well, I think that in as much as you got 2 large countries that are resolving differences, it's inherently a good thing for all of humanity. Again, time will tell and see whether or not this is something that's sustainable, and whether China is also willing to ease up some of the pressure points you've got in other areas. I mean, just to kind of list off, I've mentioned the maritime domain a couple of times, but also you've got a massive trade imbalance. India, it's about 8-to-1 trade imbalance with China. And China is, including Hong Kong, India's largest trading partner. You've got cybersecurity issues where it appears that China has infiltrated Indian power grid systems and actually managed to potentially shut off electric power. And of course, the growing issue, what happens with the succession of the Dalai Lama, who's been resident in India for decades now. So there's a lot of other areas on the table right now. But, for BRICS, I think if the 2 large countries can resolve their differences, they had high aspirations when it was first created about alternative currency methods. They have built a development bank, which is still, trying to get out of its kind of initial challenges they have being capitalized and doing robust lending. So BRICS has some big ideas, big initiatives. If tensions are resolved, maybe they can begin executing, trying to carry some of those things out. Alternative methods to global order versus the United Nations and things is a little bit loftier, I think, than the group will be able to accomplish, because you still have a lot of tensions within the membership.
Right. And finally, I want to know how this thawing relations kind of bodes for Asia, the wider global south. I note, you said a few times that the maritime issue between China and India still remains.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for a lot of us, when we think about maritime issues in China, we think about the South China Sea, we think about the Taiwan Straits, we think about the East China Sea in Japan, or even the Pacific Islands. But for India, it's very much focused on the Indian Ocean. So I think other countries in ASEAN that are concerned about China encroachment in their territory, with redesigning maps and claiming more territory, they would like big, strong India, which is an emerging power, to play a more active role in their neighborhood. But from India's own vantage point, they're almost alone in trying to hold down the Western Front and maintain peace and stability in the Indian Ocean region. It may not be as hot of a flashpoint. We don't think about it as explosive today as Taiwan, with the drills that just happened and challenging Philippine resupply missions in the South China Sea. But India is kind of alone holding up the torch there. There isn't much of a U.S. presence or any other countries. So they need to apply maximum authority to try to maintain control and dominance in their own neighborhood. So I think the rest of Asia would like to see a more robust Indian presence in East Asia, but I don't think there's as much attention to what India focuses on, which is the rising rivalry in South Asia and the Indian Ocean.
All right, Richard, appreciate your time, your insights. Richard Rossow there with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks for joining us.